Well, one of the more controversial practices in fintech has been screen scraping. And my next guest has issued a call to arms to end it and embrace open banking in a piece for startupdaily.net. Damir Cuca is the founder and CEO of fintech Basiq, and he joins me to put his case. Damir, great to have you back on the show. I must admit, I've come across it in certain aspects of my life, and every time it gives me the heebie-jeebies because I just feel insecure in the idea that someone is going all over it. And of course, we know the Cambridge Analytica story, separate industry, separate issue, but of course, screen scraping is problematic on several fronts. Tell us a little bit about why you've written this piece for startupdaily.net.
Yeah, great. Look, I think it's important to acknowledge that that screen scraping was unfortunately the only way that we could be able to access financial data. And if it wasn't for screen scraping, there wouldn't be open banking. It effectively set the pathway forward. It provided services that enable kind of fintechs to be able to tap into, to be able to leverage that data to level the playing field, compete with the incumbents, and so forth as well. So we consider it, financial data as the fuel to the fintech ecosystem going forward. Unfortunately, for a long time, screen scraping was the only way that you could be able to access data. So we were all very much at the mercy of this particular technology, and it was left really to the businesses providing services like screen scraping to do the right thing. And I can say, all of the companies, definitely to our knowledge, that do participate in that have done the actual right thing. Now, fast forward, we have CDR, with the first kind of industry being banking. It's up, it's live, it's working, and it's doing a pretty good job of providing secure access to consumers' data. So now we finally have an alternative. And now it's finally the industry has an ability to adapt practice that's significantly more secure, puts the consumer in charge of the data, gives them all the provisions and controls it needs to be able to turn things on or off, agree or disagree with particular kind of sharing of the data principle. And I think it's a fantastic framework kind of going forward.
I suppose one way to think about it was a little bit like when ride sharing first arrived here in Australia, and of course it was technically illegal at the time, but they kept doing it anyway, and then it became part of the system. The governments came up with a plan, and now we have peer-to-peer transport and a range of options, so consumers do win as a consequence. Listen, I do want to ask, we're a year and a half into the rollout of open banking. We're just at that point where CDR is now moving into other use cases and areas. But how do you think we've done with the progress so far? Because I do think, of course, of one British company that just decided we weren't moving fast enough. Is it a case that we all really need to get on board and accelerate this progress so we can get real reform and new initiatives?
Yeah, look, I think sometimes sometimes it does require a bit of a catalyst for change. I think something, just to close off the earlier point, something that we've seen in the screen scraping world is that due to the general increase of fraud across multiple banks and institutions, and I think COVID's helped accelerate a lot of the fraud, not to do with screen scraping, but banking fraud as a whole, the banks have actually started to clamp down a lot in terms of their security measures, so making it really hard for companies that are utilizing screen scraping to be able to access that in a reliable way. So I think that has also kind of is forcing the industry to finally start to look for better alternative means, which open banking obviously provides. And I think that was one of the kind of catalysts that for change that the industry actually needed. That in addition to kind of making sure that when they do make the switch from scraping over to open banking, that it is going to be reliable, it is going to give them the data that they need, and it's not going to have a huge impact on their business. So all of that took time because obviously nobody wanted to be the first guinea pig into the process. We've been fortunate enough to be able to work with a lot of innovative fintechs to enable them to be able to access open banking data. We've helped companies transition from scraping over across, and they've had a lot of kind of positive feedback. There's still a few kinks to iron out. There always is in a new kind of like program, but overall, when you compare the two methods, open banking is significantly better.
Okay, so let's talk about the way forward. One of the points that you make is, for people kept thinking it was in the future, but it's here now, it's happened. What do we need to do as next steps to make sure that everyone does get that uplift?
Yeah, for sure. So I think first and foremost, businesses, there's unfortunately a lot of businesses that they rely on access to this data in order for them to be able to provide their core service. So one of the parts of our campaign was knowing and being kind of huge supporters of the fintech ecosystem is to let them know, is to say, hey guys, you're playing with fire. If you don't switch over to open banking, your ability to be able to access this data that's important for your business may not work tomorrow. So you have to make the act. The other part is that even when and if they do kind of finally move across, whether it's by will or by force, because they won't have the ability to access the data, there is a bit of a kind of process to be able to actually do that. So one of the things that we've realized in the entire realm of open banking is that it requires an ecosystem for it to work. So to your earlier question about, how's it going, how's it progressing? Look, I think it's not just a matter of getting a credit and calling an API. The APIs themselves, if you're plugging in directly to it, underlyingly they're very kind of complex. There's a lot of kind of accreditation requirements to actually get through. So there's a significant amount of work. Now, to be able to solve that, this is where industry participants such as Basiq, provide that transition. We provide the means for businesses to be able to access the APIs in a really simple and easy manner. We provide the tools and services they need in order to make sure that they've got the appropriate security uplift and security controls. We also provide all the tooling around the consent management as well. So, that's one of the things that we've, looking in hindsight in terms of the rollout of open banking. It's not just about having a program. You also need ecosystem participants such as Basiq to be able to make the program work. And now with the uplift that we've made and all the things that we put in place, now there is a pathway for businesses to be able to switch over from scraping over to more reliable and secure means like open banking via the Basiq platform.
There's not just that, there is also quite a solid ecosystem. You've launched this campaign where you're asking people to sign on and be a part of it. You make the point in this that the ecosystem now has 114 data holders, 88 business participants, 30 million API calls, and a 99.5% average availability for success when consumers try to share their data. It does sound like it's operating pretty well, but of course there is still plenty of room for growth.
Yeah, definitely. Look, I think it's definitely doing quite well, and so now we're kind of in this. We've kind of gone from the phase of, hey, is this even working, to yes, it's definitely working. Now we're getting into the kind of finer details of optimizing it to make it work even better. So looking at things such as some of the things that I mentioned in terms of security uplift and making sure businesses have the appropriate controls in place. I think it's a really important part of the program. The other part also is about one of the things that we've also kind of like discovered is that there's also kind of element of how to ensure that any consumers that go through the authorization authentication flow, so i.e. the ability to connect their bank, how do we make sure they have the best possible user experience as well? But that's something that is a sign of where the system is at in terms of maturity, that we're looking at things like that. So we're closely monitoring how the banks have implemented their UX to make sure that there isn't any kind of friction points, and if there are, we have channels obviously to be able to communicate with them. And I can say, coming from the world of screen scraping over to open banking, it's phenomenal to be able to engage with institutions directly now and directly with their teams, where we can kind of surface things like UX issues and they can jump on it as well.
It does sound like there has been substantial progress. Damir, great to have you on the show. People can read more from you on startupdaily.net this afternoon and click on that link for the campaign that you've launched. Thanks for your time on the show today and all the best for the break.
Absolute pleasure.